The highway stretched endlessly under the fading sun, my thumb out, my backpack heavy, and my nerves frayed. I didn't expect anyone to stop, not here, not tonight. But then, out of nowhere, the rumble of a truck slowed beside me, red and blue lights flashing faintly against the dusk. My heart leapt when I realized it wasn't just any truck, it was a police truck. And the man inside looked at me with a gaze that was anything but routine. What happened next blurred the line between authority and vulnerability, between fear and something I never thought I'd find on the side of a lonely road. This wasn't just a ride. It was the beginning of a story I could never have imagined. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and turn on notifications, so you don't miss the stories that will keep you hooked until the very last word. The road was nearly empty when the police truck slowed down beside me. Its headlights washed over me, blinding for a moment, before the driver leaned out of the window. The brim of his hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but I could feel his gaze sizing me up. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice steady, professional, but there was a weight behind it I couldn't place. I shifted the strap of my backpack nervously, glancing at the faded asphalt stretching behind me. "Didn't have much of a choice," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my heart raced. "Just need a ride." For a long second he didn't move. Then he nodded toward the passenger side. "Get in. Safer than standing out here." I hesitated, scanning his face. Strong jaw, neatly trimmed beard, eyes that caught what little light the sky had left. He didn't look unkind, but he carried himself with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Still, the night was creeping in, and the idea of being stranded on the shoulder was worse than climbing into his truck. I pulled the door open and slid inside, the scent of leather and faint cologne hitting me instantly. The cab was warm compared to the chill outside, and the low hum of the engine filled the silence between us. He glanced at me briefly before pulling back onto the road. "So," he said, his voice calm but curious, "where are you headed?" I hesitated. "Just somewhere away from here." He raised an eyebrow, his eyes flicking toward me before focusing on the road again. "That's not much of an answer." I gave a nervous laugh, rubbing my palms against my jeans. "Maybe I don't have one. Maybe I just needed to leave." His jaw tightened, and I could tell he was studying me even without looking directly. Running from something? The question hung in the air. I thought about lying, but there was something about his tone, direct but not harsh, that made me feel like honesty was safer. "Yeah, I guess I am." The truck was quiet for a while after that, the steady sound of tires against pavement the only noise. My chest loosened a little as I leaned back against the seat, watching the highway lights blur by. Finally, he spoke again. "Name's Daniel." I turned to him, surprised he'd offered it first. "Evan," I replied softly. "Evan," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. Then he added, "Not a great night to be alone on the road, Evan." I swallowed, sensing layers in his words. "You're probably right." His lips twitched, almost a smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "You hungry?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Yeah, actually. There's a diner a few miles ahead. Quiet place. Food's decent." His voice was casual, but there was something in his glance that felt like an invitation, not just an offer. I nodded. "Sure." The silence that followed wasn't as heavy as before. My nerves eased just enough for me to really look at him. The way his hands gripped the wheel, steady but tense. The faint scar near his wrist. The shape of his shoulders under his uniform. He was older than me, maybe mid-30s, but carried an energy that felt both grounded and untouchable. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. Just a hitchhiker? Or someone who needed more than a ride? When the neon glow of the diner sign finally appeared on the horizon, I felt my stomach twist, not from hunger, but from the sense that this night was only just beginning. We parked and he killed the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain had started again, light droplets tapping against the windshield. Daniel finally turned to me, his eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that made my breath catch. "Let's get you fed," he said, but his voice had softened. Inside, the diner was almost empty. A lone waitress poured coffee for a trucker in the corner, and the hum of an old jukebox played faintly in the background. We slid into a booth, the red leather creaking beneath us. Daniel ordered coffee and pie for himself, then looked at me. "Burger okay?" I nodded, grateful he hadn't asked too many questions. As we waited, he leaned back, studying me in that same way he had on the road. Not interrogating, not exactly protective, but curious in a way that made my skin warm. "You're young," he said finally. "You've got a whole life ahead of you. Why does it feel like you've already burned out?" I blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness of his observation. Maybe because I haven't found a reason not to. His expression shifted, softer now, almost pained. He looked down at his coffee, then back up. Sometimes the reason shows up when you least expect it. The way he said it made my pulse race. Like he wasn't just talking in general. Like he was talking about right now. Before I could respond, the waitress set down our food, breaking the moment. Daniel thanked her, then slid the plate toward me. "Eat," he said simply, but the command carried warmth. I bit into the burger, more out of obedience than hunger, and felt his eyes linger on me longer than they should have. The air between us grew thick, charged with something neither of us wanted to name yet. Halfway through the meal, Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You know I could get in trouble for this." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "For what?" He held my gaze, his eyes steady and unflinching. "For being here. With you. For letting it be more than what it should be." The diner suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer, the hum of the jukebox louder. My chest tightened, my thoughts spinning. He wasn't talking about burgers or pie. He wasn't even talking about the ride. And as he leaned back, giving me space, I realized the night had just shifted into dangerous, uncharted territory. I stared at him, fork suspended midair, his words still hanging between us like smoke. More than what it should be. It wasn't the kind of phrase you could pretend not to hear. The hum of the jukebox seemed louder, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen sharper, but all I could focus on was the steady, unreadable look in his eyes. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice barely steady. Daniel leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms, his expression calm but guarded. "I'm a cop. You was someone I picked up on the side of the highway. People would talk. People would assume things. And would they be wrong?" I asked before I could stop myself. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "That's the problem." Silence stretched between us. I tried to eat, but every bite felt heavy, like I was swallowing the tension instead of food. Daniel sipped his coffee slowly, watching me in that way that made me feel both seen and exposed. Finally, he spoke again. "You didn't answer me before. What are you running from?" The question hit harder this time, now that the air between us was charged with something more than curiosity. I could lie, keep it vague, but the truth pushed at me. "My father," I said quietly. "He wanted me to be someone I couldn't be. To live a life I couldn't live. So I left." Daniel's gaze softened, though his posture stayed firm. "And what life is that?" I met his eyes, the words catching in my throat. The kind where I'm honest about who I am. For the first time, I saw his expression crack. A flicker of recognition, maybe even pain, flashed in his eyes. He set down his coffee cup, his hand lingering on the handle longer than necessary. "Honesty," he said slowly, "has a price. Sometimes higher than you think." The way he said it made me wonder what secrets he carried, what truths he'd buried under that uniform and authority. Before I could ask, the waitress came by with the check. Daniel slid a few bills onto the table without hesitation, then stood. "Come on. Let's get out of here." The cool night air hit me as we stepped back outside. The rain had stopped, but the asphalt was slick, reflecting the diner's neon lights in broken colors. Daniel walked ahead, shoulders tense, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. I followed, unsure if I should speak. When we reached the truck, he paused before opening the door, glancing at me over his shoulder. "You trust me, Evan?" The question caught me off guard. Do I have a reason not to? His jaw tightened. "That's not the same thing." I swallowed hard, searching his eyes for an answer he wasn't giving me. Finally I said, I do. I trust you. For a moment, something softened in his expression. Then he opened the door, motioning for me to get in. The ride back onto the highway was quieter than before, but not empty. The silence was alive, buzzing with words neither of us dared speak. I watched the road roll out ahead, the endless stretch of blacktop, and wondered if this night would change more than just my destination. After a while, Daniel cleared his throat. There's a motel a few miles up. Not fancy, but safe. You should get some rest. And you? I asked. He kept his eyes on the road. I'll stick around. Make sure you're okay. The way he said it was practical, professional even, but there was something underneath, a thread of protectiveness that felt personal. When we pulled into the motel parking lot, Daniel killed the engine and leaned back in his seat. Stay put a second, he said. He stepped out, walked inside, and returned a few minutes later with a key. Room's under my name, he explained, handing it to me. Less questions that way. I hesitated, the key cold in my palm. Why are you doing this? He met my gaze, steady and unflinching. Because I know what it's like to feel like you've got nowhere to go. The words landed heavy, deeper than I expected. We walked to the room together, the night air thick with unspoken things. Inside, the room was small, 2 beds, a flickering lamp, the faint smell of detergent. I dropped my backpack by the door, my body heavy with exhaustion, but my mind still racing. Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out at the empty parking lot. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. What about you? I asked softly. What are you running from? His shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn. You don't want to know. Yes, I do, I said firmly. He turned then, his face shadowed by the dim light. I've spent years living a life built on rules. Rules that keep me safe. Rules that keep me invisible. But every time I look at you, his voice trailed off, raw and unfinished. Every time you look at me, what? I pushed. His eyes locked on mine, fierce and unguarded. Every time, I wonder what it would feel like to break every one of those rules. The air between us thickened, my chest tightening. I took a step closer without meaning to, and he didn't move away. His hand twitched at his side, like he wanted to reach for me but couldn't let himself. And just as the space between us began to crack with possibility, a loud knock rattled the motel door. Daniel froze, his hand instinctively moving toward his belt, not for me, but for the badge and authority he carried. The knock came again, louder this time. And a voice outside called, firm and commanding, Officer Hart? Open up. The pounding on the door echoed through the tiny motel room, each knock sharper than the last. My pulse raced as I looked at Daniel. His whole body had gone rigid, hand resting near his side like instinct had already kicked in. Officer Hart? The voice called again, louder this time. We know you're in there. Daniel's jaw tightened. He glanced at me quickly, eyes flickering with something between warning and reassurance. Stay quiet, he whispered. His voice was low, steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. I swallowed hard, nodding, my throat dry. He moved toward the door, but didn't open it right away. Who is it? He called back, his tone measured, professional. This is Sergeant Collins, the voice replied. We need to talk. Open up. Daniel hesitated, his hand hovering over the knob. Then, with a deep breath, he cracked the door open just enough to see who was outside. The dim yellow light of the parking lot spilled in, and I caught a glimpse of a man in uniform, older, with a weathered face and sharp eyes. Another officer stood just behind him, arms crossed. What's going on? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Collins' tone was calm but firm. We need to ask you some questions. About tonight. Daniel stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I sat frozen on the bed, straining to hear through the thin walls. Muffled voices drifted in, Collins speaking low and authoritative, Daniel responding with clipped words. I couldn't make out everything, but I caught fragments. Highway, diner, not protocol, dangerous. My chest tightened. They knew. Somehow, they knew about me. About us. After what felt like forever, the door opened again. Daniel slipped inside, shutting it quickly. His face was pale, jaw tight, eyes darker than before. What did they want? I asked, my voice shaking. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. They've been watching. They saw us leave the diner together. Someone must have called it in. My stomach dropped. And what does that mean? It means, he said, his voice strained, that if I'm not careful, this whole thing will cost me more than just my badge. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him none of it mattered, but the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't just worried, he was afraid. Finally, he sat on the edge of the bed across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. Evan, he said quietly, I need to know if you understand what this is. What it could mean. I stared at him, my chest aching. I don't care about your badge, Daniel. I care about you. His eyes met mine, pained but searching. You say that now. But when the weight of everything comes down, when people start asking questions, when it gets ugly, his voice trailed off, heavy with doubt. I leaned forward, my voice steadier than I felt. Then let it get ugly. I've lived my whole life running from who I am. I'm done running. The words hung between us, raw and vulnerable. For a moment, I thought he might push me away again. But then something broke in his expression. His shoulders slumped, his eyes softened, and he let out a shaky breath. Slowly, almost cautiously, he reached across the space and took my hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding, but his thumb traced lightly over my skin, as if memorizing the moment. I haven't let myself feel this in years, he admitted. His voice was low, almost fragile. Not since before the badge. Before the rules. I squeezed his hand. Then maybe it's time to start. For the first time, he smiled, small, hesitant but real. It lit something inside me I hadn't realized was waiting. The air shifted then, the distance between us shrinking. He leaned closer, eyes locked on mine, and I felt the world narrow to just the space between our lips. The weight of fear and doubt still pressed on us, but in that instant, it didn't matter. And just as the heat of his breath brushed against me, a sharp knock rattled the window. We both froze, pulling back quickly. Outside, in the dim glow of the parking lot, stood Sergeant Collins again. His silhouette was unmistakable, his posture rigid. He didn't shout this time. He just stood there, watching through the glass, his expression unreadable. Daniel cursed under his breath, standing abruptly. He yanked the curtain closed, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He's not going to let this go, Daniel muttered. He'll keep pushing until I crack. Fear prickled down my spine, but underneath it was something else, defiance. Then don't crack, I said firmly. Don't let him decide for you. Daniel looked at me, torn between fear and resolve. His hand clenched into a fist, then released. He wants me to choose, Daniel whispered, his voice thick. Between the life I've built and the one I want. The silence that followed was deafening, the choice heavy in the air. And as the sound of Colin's footsteps faded into the night, Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes burning with something fierce, something final. I think I've already chosen. Daniel's words, I think I've already chosen, still hung in the air long after Collins's footsteps faded into the night. The room was quiet except for the hum of the motel's old air conditioner, but inside me, everything felt loud. My pulse, my thoughts, the flood of emotions I wasn't sure how to contain. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at him. His shoulders were tense, his jaw set, but there was something in his eyes, a fire I hadn't seen before, a crack in the wall he had spent years building. What does that mean? I finally asked, my voice cautious but firm. He turned toward me, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. It means I'm done hiding. Done living by rules that were never mine to begin with. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. But saying it and living it, those are two very different things. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him it didn't matter how hard it got, but before I could, his phone buzzed again on the nightstand. The screen lit up with one word that made his whole body stiffen. Daniel stared at the screen like it was a weapon aimed at his chest. Finally, he silenced the call, shoving the phone face down. He knows, he muttered. They've already told him. The weight in his voice made the room feel smaller. What will he do? I asked. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. What won't he do? He'll call in favors, twist arms, pull every string he has to make sure I fall back in line. And if I don't, his voice dropped. He'll cut me off. Completely. The way he said it told me this wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about blood, legacy, a lifetime of expectations that pressed down on him like chains. Then let him, I said softly, surprising even myself. Let him cut you off. You'll still have you. And you'll still have me. His eyes snapped to mine, something raw flashing across them. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, I replied. Complicated is just another word for fear. For a moment, silence stretched between us again, heavy and fragile. Then Daniel stood abruptly, pacing the small space like a caged animal. You don't understand, Evan. My father isn't the kind of man you walk away from without consequences. He has connections everywhere. If he wants to ruin me, he can. Career, reputation, everything I've built. It could all be gone tomorrow. I stood too, closing the distance between us. Then maybe that's the price. Maybe it's the only way you'll ever be free. His chest rose and fell sharply, his eyes locked on mine. And for the first time since the diner, I saw it, fear and hope colliding in the same gaze. Before either of us could say more, there was a sharp knock at the door again. My heart lurched, but this time Daniel didn't move toward it. He stood frozen, listening. Daniel Hart, a voice barked from outside. Male, deep, commanding, but not Collins. Someone else. Open up. This is official business. Daniel's face paled. That's my father's aide, he whispered. If he's here, it means my father isn't waiting for me to come to him. He's bringing the fight here. The knock came again, harder this time. You have 2 minutes, officer. Make the right choice. My chest tightened, panic clawing at me. What do we do? Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. If I open that door, it's over. They'll drag me back, spin their story, and bury this night before it ever mattered. And if you don't? I asked. He looked at me, his jaw tight, his voice low but steady. Then I choose you. And I walk away from everything else. The silence after his words felt endless. The knock on the door echoed again, sharper, demanding. Finally, Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, light, fleeting but full of weight. Evan, he said softly, I need to know if you're ready for what comes next. Because once I make this choice, there's no undoing it. My throat was dry, but my heart was certain. I'm here, I whispered. Whatever happens. His lips curved into the faintest, pained smile. Then hold on tight. Another knock thundered against the door, followed by silence. The aide's voice dropped low, threatening. You have 30 seconds. Daniel's eyes burned into mine, fierce and unshakable. He reached for the latch, his hand hovering. His chest rose with one last deep breath. And then, with a final glance at me, he made his move. The pounding on the door seemed to reverberate straight through my chest. Daniel's hand hovered over the latch for what felt like a lifetime, his jaw tight, eyes burning with a war between fear and determination. Then, without another word, he flipped the lock and swung the door open. The man standing there was tall, dressed in a dark suit that screamed authority but lacked a badge. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw me in the room, but he directed his voice at Daniel. Your father wants you home. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Daniel's spine straightened, his voice calm but firm. Tell him no. The aide blinked, clearly not expecting defiance. Excuse me? You heard me, Daniel said, stepping fully into the doorway. I'm not coming back. Not to his house, not to his rules, not to a life that isn't mine. The aide's expression hardened. Do you have any idea what you're saying? What this means? Daniel didn't flinch. For once, yes, it means I choose myself. I choose freedom. And I choose him. He nodded toward me, and my chest tightened with a mix of fear and pride. The aide's eyes flicked to me, his lips curling into something bitter. This is what you're throwing it all away for? A stranger on the side of the road. Daniel's voice grew sharper. He's not a stranger. He's the only thing that's felt real in years. The air between them was electric, the aide's authority clashing with Daniel's newfound strength. Finally, the man shook his head. You'll regret this. Your father will make sure of it. Daniel's reply was cold and final. Then let him try. The aide's gaze lingered on him, perhaps waiting for a crack, but when none came, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the night. The door closed with a soft click, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation itself. Daniel leaned against the door, exhaling slowly. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady when they found mine. That's it, he whispered. It's done. I moved closer, my heart racing. Are you sure? He gave a small, almost disbelieving laugh. For the first time in my life, I am. I reached for his hand, and he let me take it, gripping like a man holding onto the edge of a cliff. Then whatever comes, we face it together. We stayed like that for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down but also lifting something off his shoulders. Finally, Daniel pulled me into an embrace, his forehead resting against mine. Do you realize what you've done to me? He murmured. You've turned my entire world upside down. I smiled, though my throat was tight. Maybe it needed turning. He kissed me then, fierce, desperate, but full of relief, as though sealing a promise he'd never dared to make before. And for the first time, I believed it wasn't just a fleeting moment, wasn't just rebellion against his father. It was us. When we finally broke apart, he sat on the bed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what tomorrow looks like. My career, my family, it could all vanish overnight. I sat beside him, letting my shoulder brush his. Then maybe tomorrow isn't about what you lose. Maybe it's about what you finally gain. His eyes softened, and he let out a breath like he was learning how to breathe for the first time. You make it sound simple. Because it is, I said. Love doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be brave. We didn't sleep much that night. We talked until dawn, about his childhood, the weight of expectations, the loneliness he'd carried. For once, he let himself be vulnerable, and I realized how much strength it takes to let someone see the parts you've always hidden. When the sun finally rose, spilling golden light through the thin curtains, Daniel turned to me with tired but resolute eyes. This is the first morning in years I don't feel like I'm living someone else's life. I squeezed his hand. That's because you're finally living yours. Outside, the world carried on. Cars on the highway, people rushing to jobs, obligations piling up. But inside that little motel room, we had carved out a piece of freedom. Imperfect, fragile, uncertain, but ours. Daniel leaned back, his voice steady but tender. Whatever comes, I don't regret this. Not 1 second. I smiled, feeling the truth of his words settle deep in my chest. Then let's keep walking, no matter where the road leads. And as the day began, we stepped into it together. Not as officer and hitchhiker, not as prisoner and legacy, but as two men who had chosen to stop running from themselves.